There was a debate about how do you, if you have to correct the Koreh, how much do you have to correct it when you correct it? Is it just a tefach or 4 tefach? So there was a debate. One who holds 4 tefachs over Asr Lishtamish Tachas HaKorah. He held that when you lay a beam across the opening, so the beam has an outer edge and an inner edge. So according to this Manda Omar, you draw an imaginary line down the inner edge. So you create a wall, and you can walk everywhere in the Mavli except underneath the Korah. So the Gemara says low. Everybody holds that you draw an imaginary line on the outer edge of the beam, and therefore you could actually carry or walk underneath the beam itself. So what's the machlokas? What's the purpose of laying a cross beam on top of a mavli? So one mandabar holds it's because of heker. You want people to stop because Rosh Hashanah is right in front of you, and the seeing a beam there makes you remind. Now, if the beam is too high, it won't be a heker. That's why it's got to be. No, another mandamar hold. Putting the beam up is like building a 4th wall, closing off the mavui. It's like a miniature mechitza. Gemara says no. Everybody holds the kor mishum heker. V'hacha beheker shalmat of heker shamalakamifically. Do you compare a heker on the beam above and what you're doing on the ground below the same way? The Mar Sovar Amir and heker shalmata heker shamala. You have to treat any heker you make on the bottom the same as you do the bud on top. Since on the top 1 tefach is enough, on the bottom 1 tefach is enough as well. No, on the top you need 1, but on the bottom you need 4. They all agree that the heker really should be the same. Rather, maybe the one who says use 4 because you might come to reduce it. If you start at 4 and you reduce it, you'll always end up about greater than 1. If you start with 1 and you reduce it, you may end up in the Rosh Hashanah completely. Period. Now, the Korah cannot be greater than 20 amas, and it cannot be lower than 10 tfachim. So let's say it was 9 tfachim from the ground. So it's bad. The chakak bo lahashlimo lasara. You dug into the ground some depth so that there would be space of 10. The question would be kama choykek. Do you have to make a ditch of 1 or a ditch of 4? So first of all, doesn't understand the question. Kama choykek, what do you mean? How deep do you have to dig it? Kama detzorchle. That means if it's 9 tefach above the ground, you got to dig 1. If it's 8 tefach above the ground, you got to dig 2. So the Gemara says, what do you mean kama choykek? You dig as much as you need. So the Gemara says, no. Ela mishchol bekama. It means you're gonna dig a ditch to make it deeper. But how wide does that ditch have to be going into the mavli? Rav Yosef Amar ba'arba. It has to be arba tfachim. Abaya Omar ba'arba amois. It has to be arba amois. What's this machlokas based on? Lema Rabami Rabasi kamifli. Let us say they're arguing Ravami Ravasi. The itmar. Mavli shenifratz mitzido klape rosho. You have a break in the wall of the mavli, one of the side walls, close to the opening. As long as you have a board, arba tfachim, wide, so that there is some closure there. Matir bepirtza ad eser. That means even if you had an opening in the side of the mavli by 10 amas, you'd still be able to carry in the mavli. The im lav. Now let's say you don't have a pas arba. So pachas mishloisha. So then if the opening, if the opening in the side wall of the mavui was less than 3, then it would be permitted. But shlosha einamati. Because people, if there's no board next to the opening of the mavui, people will use that as a shortcut, and they will not see the defined demarcation between the mavui and the Rosh Hashanah. Rav Yosef is later Rav Ami. Let's say Rav Ami. What do you mean? Hasam sof mavui. That is a different comparison. It's not a good comparison. That talk about you already have a mavui. It's the opening of the mavui. Something happened to it. Now you have to correct it. Hacha tchilas mavui. It's different than when you're talking about building a mavui lechatchila. If there were not the correct conditions that you need to have a mavui, it won't be good. Ika arba amois in. If the mavui was 4 amas long, which is the minimum amount of distance that a mavui could be, then it'll be okay. Ilo lo. And if it doesn't have that minimum shear, it won't be a good mavui. Amar Abaya. B'no amina lo detanya. Ein mavui nitra b'lecha v'koira. So we know, we've learned that a mavui, you can carry in it if you have a side beam or a cross beam. Lecha is a side beam, koira is a cross beam. You can't just have an alleyway with no chatzeros and houses opening into it. You have to have at least 2 chatzeros, which have batim opening up into each chatzer. If you have less than that, it's not a mavui. And the Gemara doesn't understand. Iba arba, if the mavui is arba amas, how are you going to have these chatzeros opening up into such a small mavui? For example, let's say you have the mavui is right at the opening of the alleyway, and the openings of the chutzers open up right into them. What kind of mavui is corrected with a cross beam or a side beam? It's got to be length greater than its width. It can't be a square. And what you've described is not length greater than its width. And what else does it have to have? So what you've described, won't work. Rav Yosef says the pasuk lo b'keren zavis. It opens up in a corner. That means it's sort of the two openings of a chotzer into the mavui happen in the corner. Let's say you have a cross beam. You put a piece of wood on the side of the opening of the mavui, and it's sticking into the space of the mavui. As long as the board that's sticking into the opening of the mavui is less than arba amos, nid mishem lechi. It's a kosher lechi, and you don't need another lechi for it. But once you've placed a wooden board from the side of the mavui wall into the middle of the opening of the mavui, if it's arba amos, then in itself is a new mavui. Nid mishum mavui. You need a lechi. Either you put a piece of wood on that board or on the other side. The Rav Yosef lafuki b'toras lechi adik arba amos l'mevim mavui. It's not. He takes it out of Toras lechi up until arba amos. Now, if that is if it's not greater than daled amos, it would be okay as a lechi. So let's analyze this more in detail. You have a lechi that's sticking out from the opening of the mavui arba amos. Now, pachas barba amos nid mishum lechi. It's a good lechi. You don't need another lechi. If it's once it hits arba amos nid mishum mavui. So now you've created a new mavui. V'tzarch lechi achel atiro. People are not going to see this as the old mavui anymore. you've created like a narrower opening. So you need a new lechi to be able to carry in that mavui. So the question is also lechi heichan mamida. Where do you attach the new piece of wood? If you stick it onto the wood, that piece of 4 amas wood, then you just created the problem, made it worse. Rav Papa put it on the other side. The other wall, right? You got 2 walls, right? The mavui is like this. One wall, the other wall. So we've now extended something daled amas to go into here. So you put the lechi on this side. He says, no, you can add the extra piece of wood onto the 4 amas beam itself. The matfi be the miftzervei. You put it either higher or lower, so people will see that it's not a typical arba amas board, but it's got a piece of wood sticking on it, so they'll know that that's the lechi. Amar when the brother of Yeshua loy amar on elaba mavu shmoine. That's talking about that a mavu that's at least 8 amas wide, 8 or more, says Rashi, 8 or more. Aval b'mavu shiva. See, but if the width of the mavu is only 7, nitter b'oimed merubal aparetz. What have you done? You've taken an arba amos board, right? Here's the opening of your mavui, and now you've closed off more than 50% of it. So you've had like a 4th wall. Just like you can carry in a chotzer, you can certainly carry in that mavui. Kavachayim a chotzer. Uma chotzer shein and iteres belechi v'koira. Chotzer doesn't need. A chotzer has 4 walls. It doesn't need a lechi v'koira to carry in a chotzer. Niteres b'oimed merubal aparetz. As long as the walls, there's more wall than empty space. Mavui sheniter b'lechi v'koira. A mavui that is corrected by lechi v'koira. Ein odin sheniter b'oimed merubal aparetz. It certainly should be carryable in that mavui, since basically you've created a 4th wall. The Gemara rejects the comparison. Malachotzer shekain pirtzosa be'eser. See, a chotzer remains a chotzer unless you make a hole in the wall greater than 10 amas. Toimer b'mavui shepirtzosa ba'arba. We're stricter by a mavui. That once you have an arba amos opening in the side of a mavui wall, the mavui is bad. So you can't learn a kavachomer because l'chora, the mavui is more strict than the chotzer. Ksavar avuda b'red v'yeshua, mavui nami pirtzosa be'eser. The same. The reason why allows this is because he's of the shita that a mavui is still a kosher mavui up until 10 amas opening in a wall. Alaman Kamina. Who is he responding to? Ravuna. Ravuna pertasa b'arba spherely. So what kind of Ravuna holds this? You can only go up to 4. And Chanami says the Ravuna brother of Yeshua time of the nafshei kamar. He says it's only Sfora. Rashi Amar no. Afilu teva mavui shmoin nami lo tzarich lechi. That we disagree with what we said about less than 8. That if it's 8, it doesn't require lechi. Manavshach. Ioimid nafish. Because if you stick a 4 amas board across the opening, either way it's going to work. If it stands, niter b'oimid merubal aparetz, it'll be okay because it's got more wall than it got opening. Be parts nafish. But if there's more opening, nid mishum lechi, there's a lechi there, right? Like normally, the opening of a mavui is wide open, and it works with a lechi. So in essence, Rav Ashi is giving a from Manavshach, either way it works. So my amit teshavat travayu ki adadi. So what do you want to say, that Ravuna and him hold the same din? Havale safek divrayim, because no matter what, in halacha, if it's a safek, it's only a safek midrabanan, and we know. If you have a suffix b'daraisa, we go lahachmir. But suffix divrayim, the rabbanon is a kula. So worst comes to be makel in this case because the whole din is midrabanan. Okay, so gentlemen, I suggest that we learn tomorrow night. I'm sorry, tomorrow we can learn in the morning. Let me see my schedule just to make sure that I'm not in surgery.